Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's call. As you might expect, we have a very big call today. We have well over 1,600 people registered for the call. So I'm going to give it a couple minutes to allow for many more to join before we get started. Thanks for your patience. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's call. As expected, it's going to be a very large one. We already have almost 800 people on. We have about 1,600 people registered. I'm going to give it another minute or two to allow more people to join before we get started. So thanks for your patience. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm going to give it another minute or so. We have a very large call. We have about 850 people on already and many more expected to join. In the meantime, I just want to remind you that the chat and the Q&A boxes are open. So if you have questions as we talk, please put them in there. Just drop them into the, best if you drop questions into the Q&A box. And if you have links to share, put them in the chat box. And then I'll do my best to get to them throughout the conversation. I'll get started in about one more minute. Okay, hi everybody. This is Diane Yentel. I'm President and CEO of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Thanks so much for joining today's call. It's our regular weekly call on coronavirus, disasters, housing, and homelessness, but it's a special call today where we're only going to have two topics, both of them really good and exciting news, one on the COVID relief package and one on new FEMA policy for non-congregate shelter options for people experiencing homelessness. And we'll start with the first. But first, I just want to say, and also we have a very large call. We have nearly 1,000 people on the line already, and more expected, I think, as we move through the agenda. So just a reminder, the Q&A and the chat boxes are open. If you have links to share, you can drop them in the chat. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to get them to them throughout the call. And just to start off and say, you know, here we are, we're at the finish line for now, for this bill. And I just want to start the call really by saying so many thanks. Thank you to all of you who have worked side by side with us since March to get us to this point. So as you all undoubtedly know already, the COVID relief package that Congress will vote on soon includes an extension of the eviction moratorium through the end of January and $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, among other things. And we'll talk about all of that in more detail momentarily. But first, we just have to take a moment to recognize, one, what a tremendous relief and difference these protections and resources are going to make in the lives of tens of millions of renter families. And two, that we would not be here right now were it not for the persistent, relentless, and effective advocacy of so many of you. For 9 months now, week after week after week, you have joined these calls, 600, 800, 1,500 people and organizations joining week after week after week for 9 months. You all have led calls to action in your communities. You've produced essential research and estimates of needs and costs of inaction. You've acted heroically, fighting side by side in court to keep renters housed or to shut down eviction courts or to move people experiencing homelessness out of congregate shelters and into safety. You've all partnered with us to lead this national campaign for rent relief now, and you've never stopped shouting from the rooftops for what is needed. And so you all have gotten us to this point, each one of you. People experiencing homelessness, struggling renters, organizers, advocates, shelter service housing providers, national, state, and local organizations, housing organizations, but also leaders in other fields, healthcare, education, local government, civil rights, racial justice, so many others, policymakers, foundations, concerned citizens. It's our collective advocacy that got us here, so close to these essential protections for renters. So thank you all, truly, for your tremendous work. And we also clearly would not be here without the tremendous and tenacious work of congressional champions and their staff. Congresswoman Maxine Waters and Senator Sherrod Brown, Minority Leader Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, they led this fight in Congress and they never let up on the needs for renters. And then a bipartisan set of negotiators supported the eviction moratorium and $25 billion in rental assistance, led by Senator Susan Collins, Senator Rob Portman, Senator Mark Warner, Senator Joe Manchin. And they each deserve our thanks too. And then it was back to the committees to keep negotiating. And again, Maxine Waters, Sherrod Brown, and their staff, they stood incredibly strong against a lot of efforts to water down, reduce, or even just eliminate some of these essential protections. So many, many thanks to our congressional staff, to our congressional champions, and to their really incredible staff. And the media also really played and continues to play an essential role in shining a spotlight on the needs of renters and the flaws in all the protections and the work that we have to do to make these protections more comprehensive for the people who need them. And finally, of course, I have to give a shout out to the incredible team at the National Income Housing Coalition, really just a group of extraordinarily effective, dedicated, and skilled people, each of whom contributed to all of our collective efforts. So thank you all for getting us to this point, so close to avoiding catastrophic outcomes for tens of millions of renters and communities across the country. So, okay, let's talk about what's in the bill. So first off, there are multiple bills that Congress will vote on, and most have relevance to everybody on this call. So first, and what we're going to spend the bulk of today's call talking about, is the COVID relief package. That's what includes the extension of the CDC eviction moratorium through January 31st. It includes the $25 billion in rental assistance. It includes an extension of the CRF deadline to spend funds for emergency rental assistance, which, as we've talked about before, some communities are having challenges with. And it includes a permanent fix for the 4% floor for low-income housing tax credit deals. Now, also just to say, none of this is enough. And I mean, I don't have to tell anybody on this call that this is not enough. You know that very well. It's very clear that one, these are essential and urgently needed resources and protections that should be enacted now. And then we're going to demand much more from Congress and from the incoming administration to truly protect renters, people experiencing homelessness, and assure housing stability for everybody during and after this pandemic. Okay, so to start with one of the really top topics that I know many of you want to hear more about, which is the rental assistance piece. And actually, first, just on process to share. A lot of people are asking, is the bill language available? So it's literally just been made available in the last 20 minutes. They were having all sorts of technicalities with posting this massive, massive bill to the internet. So it looks like somebody has put Alayna. Alayna's going to be dropping lots of links in the chat box, so watch for Alayna. So she just dropped a link for the bill text. Now, it's a massive, massive bill because it includes the COVID relief package. It includes an omnibus spending bill for the entire federal government, so about $1.4 trillion in spending. It includes a tax extenders package, and I believe at this point it has a number of other miscellaneous bills attached to it as well. So it's just this massive, massive bill that the House and the Senate are going to vote on at some point today or tomorrow, and then it'll go to the president for signature. So, okay, let's focus on the $25 billion in emergency rental assistance for a few minutes. So, I believe Alayna has already put in the chat box a link to a fact sheet that she and Sarah Sadian put together that goes in depth over the language and how these emergency rental assistance funds are going to get to renters in need. So the first thing you should know is that it is going to be administered by the Department of Treasury through something like the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So you all will remember in the CARES Act, there was $150 billion in the Coronavirus Relief Fund allocated to states and cities. It had many uses, one of which was emergency rental assistance, which some communities use those funds for. This $25 billion is only for assistance to renters, but it will go out to states and cities through a similar formula and mechanism that the original CRF did. So first, out of that $25 billion, they take out $400 million that's going to be allocated to U.S. territories, and $800 million that's going to be allocated to tribal communities. And then the remaining funds go out essentially by formula to states and to cities who have populations of 200,000 or more. And Alayna can also drop into the chat box a chart that we put together with our estimates of how much each state's allocation will be. Once the state gets that allocation, from that allocation, funds will go to cities. Okay, now the uses of the funds it's exclusively to keep renters housed. So 90% of the funds have to go to financial assistance and can be used for back rent or back utilities, or forward rent or forward utility costs, and for some other housing expenses needed to keep people housed. The assistance can be provided to an individual for 12 months, except if it needs to be provided for another 3 months in order to assure the housing stability of that household. So for up to 15 months of some combination of back rent and forward rent. There's some details that I'm not going to get into right now that are in the fact sheet about recertification of need every 3 months. You can take a look at that for forward rent. And then so 90% of the funds are used for those purposes: back rents, back utilities, forward rent, forward utilities, some case management. No, sorry, actually the case management comes from the remaining 10% of those funds, which can be used for case management, other services to keep people housed. That'll be defined by the incoming Treasury Secretary through guidance, and services that are intended to keep households stably housed. Okay, recipients can also use some funds, some of this up to 10% of the funds, for some level of administrative costs. Okay, then comes eligibility. So the eligibility requirements for renters to receive assistance here is they have to be below 80% area median income, and the states and localities who get these funds and are administering them have to prioritize assistance to households who are at 50% or below area median income. So the idea here, which we believe was very important and pushed hard for, was to ensure that these limited funds that we already know are not going to be enough to meet all of the needs, that they go first to the people who are most at risk of being evicted, and that's the lowest income people. So there's some details too in the fact sheet about how income is determined, and you can take a look there for those details. Landlords can apply for the funds and property owners on behalf of tenants who owe back rent, but they have to do it together with the tenant. So the landlord and the tenant co-sign the application so that the tenant is aware that the landlord is applying for money for their back rent. And the landlord has to provide the tenant documentation, has to give to the tenant documentation of the landlord's application. And then those payments have to be used to pay the tenant's rental obligations. There's also a fail-safe in the language that says if a landlord refuses to participate in this program, which we have unfortunately seen in LA and in North Carolina and some other communities, if a landlord refuses to participate, then the locality should get the money directly to the renter to make the payments for themselves, for whether it's to their landlord for rent or to their utility company for utility costs. There's a pretty tight deadline on actually spending some of the funds. And there's an incentive for communities to get this money out fast, because communities who haven't spent their money or enough of their money by September 2021, those funds will get swept back and then reallocated to communities that are spending down their money fast. So everybody has an incentive to get the money out as quickly as possible. If there's money still on the table by next September, they're going to start sweeping some of that back and giving it to the communities who are getting their money out fast and have continued need. And then there's also some really good components on reporting. So the Treasury, together with HUD, are going to be required to report quarterly on how each state and locality, each tribal and territorial government uses the money. They have to include some details around the number of households served, the acceptance rate for applicants, the type of assistance that's provided, the amount of assistance that's provided, the income levels, and they have to disaggregate the data by gender, race, ethnicity of the primary applicant in the household. So that's going to give us some very useful information about where things are going well and where it's not, and who is being served by these funds and who maybe is being left behind. And the Treasury Secretary can make the full unredacted data set available for research purposes. So I see there's a ton of questions and others coming in. So I'm going to take a moment and see what within them I can answer. Again, I hope you will all look at the fact sheet because it probably answers many of the questions that you have. And it's also, keep in mind that this is the most information that we have right now. So this is what's in the legislative text. And from this, a lot of communities, especially the 518 or so who already have emergency rental assistance programs that they created with previous funds made available from the CARES Act, they can start using these funds pretty quickly, because there's enough guardrails and eligibility and descriptions in the legislative text for them to do that. But there will be some places, there's been questions about, well, how long before, when the landlord refuses to participate, how much period of time needs to pass until the money goes directly to the renter? Those kind of things I don't have the answer to. In part, it's going to be up to the program administrators to sort out some of those definitions and specifics. And in large part, there is a need for Treasury to put out some guidance on some of these issues. And I worry a little bit about that, just to be upfront, because of course we're in this kind of in-between place right now where one administration is leaving, another is coming in. Lots of uncertainty about when the incoming Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen will be confirmed and have her team able to issue guidance. So there could be a period of time here where there are some unanswered questions. And I hope, and we will do everything we can to make information available to communities to encourage them to start spending the money quickly and not to wait. But there might be some delays, really just because of the time that we're in right now. Let's see. Somebody asked if there's anything for student loans, not in this funding allocation, but I can't speak to that in the larger bill because I have not been focused on that. How much, yeah, this is a really good question. Somebody's asking, how much can states add requirements or obstacles to the rental assistance? And gives an example in Michigan where there were these additional requirements added. Unfortunately, that can still happen here, right? So these funds go to the states and localities. And yes, what we saw previously with the original CRF allocation, and specifically when they used it for rental assistance, is that some state legislatures or city councils added new rules to the funds and tied the hands of program administrators. Unfortunately, that is a possibility here with these funds. And it actually specifically says in the language somewhere that localities can add other priorities or preferences for these funds. So there's going to be a lot of work for all of you who are in states and cities to do, starting really now, to advocate at the local level and make sure that these funds stay as simple and as least burdensome as possible to get the money out quickly. But that is going to take some state and local advocacy in some cases. Let's see. Somebody notes that there's also landlords failing to participate in Colorado, as well as I had mentioned, North Carolina and LA. So noting that it is a positive, it's a really important part of the legislation that says that if those landlords fail to participate, the money can go directly to the renter. Somebody's asking if funds can be utilized for rental deposits, and yes, I believe they can. I think that's part of the 10% of the funds that can be used for other housing needs to ensure housing stability. So if and that will be up to the local program administrator, but it's an allowable use. Only a fraction of the funds can be used for that, but some of them can. Okay, then there's a question about the allocation, which is a good one that I was going back and forth with our research team on earlier today about how do the funds actually then get distributed to the cities and how much money do they get? So it's going to work similarly to the first tranche of CRF funds that came in the CARES Act, where there is a formula allocation, I believe primarily based on population, for each. First they take out the funding. In this case, that's going to be allocated just for territories and tribes. And then with what's left, they, based on a formula, based on population, create an allocation for each state. And we've done an estimate of that, which Alayna put in the chat box. Maybe she can put it again now so that it's at the top and you can see it. That's our estimate of what states' full allocation will be. Then from that state, cities will get money. And it'll work as it did again in the earlier CARES Act, where cities certify with Treasury that they are a city and they're eligible for these funds or something of that sort. I'm not entirely clear on the certification process. And then based also on the population of that city, they will get an allocation of funding that comes from the total state funding. So for example, I think California, it's $2 billion in rental assistance. I'm just double checking. It's $2.6 billion, we estimate. in emergency rental assistance funds that will go to the state of California. So for example, the city of LA, the city of San Francisco, their allocations will come from that larger $2.6 billion pot, and same for other cities and states. Okay, another question is asking about the eligibility, 50% or 80%. So the eligibility is 80% or below area median income. And then cities communities that receive the funds are required to prioritize people who are at 50% or below AMI. All right, I'm going to see what other questions. Somebody asked about the tracking. Are they tracking race and ethnicity? Yes, they are. Those are some of the things that need to be tracked by the administrators, and quarterly reports will be due to Treasury and possibly HUD. Let's see. Okay, then there's questions. All right, I'm going to move on for a second. We'll come back to more on the rental assistance. But I want to talk briefly about the eviction moratorium because there's some questions on that and the extension of the CRF fund. So the bill includes an extension of the CDC eviction moratorium through the end of January 31st. So yes, that is only a 1-month extension. And no, it's not long enough to assure housing stability for low-income renters during the pandemic. It's not nearly long enough. What it does is, one, provide some time for states and localities to start getting some of the emergency rental assistance dollars out, although the bulk of it will not be out by that time. It also gets us through January 20th, when Joe Biden will be inaugurated as president. And we are going to collectively, as we have already been, urge him to, on his first day in office, issue a strengthened and extended and enforced eviction moratorium. So as soon as we get back, in January, there is this brief reprieve, but then we need to get immediately back to work because our next call will be on January 4th, and at that time we'll already be in another countdown for when that CDC eviction moratorium expires. And so we're really going to be looking to and urging and pressuring President-elect Biden to act immediately on his first day in office. And as all of you on this call know, the current CDC eviction moratorium generally is doing what it was intended to do, which is keep tens of millions of people who would otherwise be losing their homes during the pandemic housed. But it's flawed, right? And you all know that. We talk about it week after week. There are a lot of people who are getting evicted despite the protections. So we are going to look to Joe Biden also to not only just extend the moratorium, but to improve it, to strengthen it, and to enforce it, as we've talked about previously. And I will say that getting this 1-month extension of the moratorium was a battle in Congress, and many of the Republicans didn't want any extension of an eviction moratorium. Then there was some discussion about reinstating the CARES Act eviction moratorium and extending that, which is clearly inadequate at this point. Only 30% of renters would have been covered. Then the bipartisan group agreed to that 1-month extension of the CDC moratorium. And then when it went out to a broader set of members of Congress to negotiate, there was a big pushback from some Republicans who were hearing from many apartment associations and landlord associations to not allow that eviction moratorium to remain. So it really was a tremendous amount of work to get that in there, and it's not enough. We have a lot more work to do on that. Okay, I'm going to see if I have one more question for now, and then we're going to come back to this, but first we're going to switch over to FEMA. So let me see, there's a lot of interesting and helpful information on student loans back and forth in the chat box if people are interested. There's some questions about where the bill text is. So Alayna put that in the chat box. Okay, and then there is one more question about actually there's two more quick provisions that I want to touch on. There's a question here about the 4% fixed housing credit. So included in the COVID relief package, the relief bill establishes a permanent floor for the 4% credit in the low-income housing tax credit program. So this is something that affordable housing developers and advocates have been working on for many years to correct and get this permanent floor of 4% credits, which it makes it easier then for them to secure the financing that they need for affordable housing projects. It essentially means more money for these developers to have to put into the development of affordable housing. And there's an estimate that it could mean as many as 126,000 new homes over the next 10 years. So it's a significant change that, again, many groups, the Action Campaign, Affordable Housing Tax Credit Coalition have been working on for many years to get that included, and it is. And there's also an allocation of $1.1 billion in disaster low-income housing tax credits. And there is an extension of the deadline for CARES Act funds, that some of which are being used for emergency rental assistance. So some of you have been paying really close attention to this in your communities. You know, we've been tracking all of the emergency rental assistance programs that have been created during the pandemic. Our research team at last count is tracking 518 programs that account for a total of $4.3 billion. Most of those funds are getting out quickly and efficiently into the people that need it. Some communities have struggled to spend some of those funds for a variety of reasons that we've talked about on previous calls. And we were estimating that about 300 million was at risk of being reverted back to Treasury on December 31st if it wasn't spent. So there is included in the bill an extension. Those communities now have until December 31st, 2021 to spend those funds. So that'll be a big relief for those communities that were struggling to get that money out the door. Okay, so many questions coming in. I'm sorry that I can't get to all of them. I'm going to pause this topic for a moment. We will come back to it later, but I want to switch topics now and turn to some guest speakers that I believe we have on. Let me just double check and see if we do. Yes, okay, great. So we've got our speakers on the line. So we're going to switch topics now and talk about FEMA and talk about non-congregate shelter reimbursement, because this is another big positive news that came in over the weekend. So at the start of the pandemic, FEMA modified its public assistance guidelines to allow state and local governments, as well as some eligible nonprofits, to get federal reimbursement to house individuals who are experiencing homelessness in non-congregate shelters. So typically hotel rooms or other individual living arrangements. So many of you on this call were doing that work very early on and really throughout the pandemic to get people who are experiencing homelessness to safety, out of congregate shelters, in some cases out of encampments, and into hotel rooms, places where they can self-isolate, self-quarantine, socially distance, and be safe. So, and that was a very good positive development that FEMA did early on, made this available to reimburse communities to do this. But there's been some challenges to how local communities have been able to do that, mostly because there's been uncertainty about how long FEMA was going to be able to and willing to reimburse for those purposes. And communities were having to find out every 30 days whether they were going to keep getting money. And we've been hearing from many communities that they were worried that the money was about to be shut off. So they were starting to think about how and where to move people from the hotel rooms to. And we've heard from other communities who have been really concerned about really taking up this program in any substantial way in the first place, because they were worried about when FEMA might turn off spigot of funds for this. So we just heard over the weekend about a change to the program that FEMA has made nationally that allows operators to receive the non-congregate shelter reimbursement authorization for a much longer duration. So we're really glad to have on the call today David Grecco from FEMA. He's been with FEMA for 15 years. He's worked a lot on mitigation, coalition building. He works a lot at the intersection of disaster response and housing. He's led national disaster housing assessment teams. He's currently the Chief of Regulations and Policy Branch at FEMA's Public Assistance Division. So, and that is the branch that handles the regs and the guidelines for the public assistance program nationally, including for COVID response. So Dave, thank you so much for joining today and on such quick notice, really appreciate you. And I wanted to turn it over to you first and see if you want to, if you're able to give us a summary of the changes that you've made.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for the time today to share the good news of some of the issuance of the memo last week to waive some guidelines currently for the non-congregate shelter reimbursement. We appreciate the collaboration and the coordination we have with National Low-Income Housing Coalition, and I have some subject matter experts online that will be speaking to you about some of those changes that we made in the issued memo last week. So I'll pass it over to Ms. Hildebrand. Hildy, if you can take over.
Okay, yes, good afternoon. I'm Hildy. Yeah, so the COVID non-congregate sheltering policy that we updated or kind of waived some requirements for, the original policy requires requests for eligibility in 30-day increments, which obviously would work in a typical disaster setting. Because COVID is such a different type of disaster, the scale and scope and everything, we're lifting the 30-day requirement to the end of the incident period. And then we're also added a 30-day reporting requirement just to ensure that applicants are conducting work that fits within the scope. And then this should also help FEMA and the applicants manage their shelter populations. So those are basically the updates we've made to this policy. So Dave, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yes, thank you, Hildy. So as Hildy explained, we had changed the reporting requirement for, it's a time extension requirement from every 30 days to now it's open until the end of what we call the incident period. The incident period is tied to our federal declarations. It's the period to which all assistance is tied to. So right now the incident period is open and ongoing for our COVID-19 declared disasters. And once that date is set to end the incident period, that will be the date that we work towards for ending reimbursement. So that is right now it's not anywhere near the future right now, as the cases are continue to increase across the nation, and we see the vaccination effort is going to be taking place well into spring and summer of next year. Anticipate that the incident period will be more likely be open for the next few months. So in doing so, we heard you on some of the administrative burdens from the states and locals of every 30 days for extending this, and brought some uncertainty to funding every 30 days for locals and most importantly the survivors and people's experiencing homelessness on the ground. So again, making this policy change to help alleviate some of the burden, but more importantly, make sure that there's certainty in funding and shelter from month to month. So the time extension is the 30-day time extension period is waived for this. However, there's still a 30-day, every 30 days states will be required to just send in some data requirements for us to take a look at to make sure that the program is still being implemented across the nation the way the policy intends.
That's great. Thank you, Dave and Hildy. It's really good news. Thank you for making the change. It's going to make a big difference we've already heard a sigh of relief from a lot of communities that are very pleased with this change. So thank you for that. A few questions if you have time. One is, so we found out about this change from Governor Newsom's office, who shared a letter that they had gotten from FEMA about the policy change. And then we confirmed, I think with you, Dave, that yes, this is a national policy, but have you all put out guidance or a memo on this? And if you haven't yet, will you soon? I hope so. It'd be helpful to have this in writing.
Yeah, so we have issued a memo internally to FEMA that puts this in place for our region, puts the guidelines in place for our FEMA regions to implement with their state counterparts, state tribes and territorial counterparts. And FEMA External Affairs will be following up with continued messaging on the change and what that means for everyone involved.
Okay, so the guidance is internal. FEMA headquarters has sent it to the regional administrators, but externally, you will be putting something out about this policy? I wasn't clear on that.
Yeah, we're anticipating working with our External Affairs Division to put out messaging based off of the change in policy for FEMA as a whole. Okay.
And then, so the duration of the reimbursement authorization now is, I think, Hildy, you said it's to the end of the incident period. So how do you define that?
So this is Dave. Right now, that is something that's ongoing. It's in process with our FEMA leadership. In terms of defining what the end of innocent period may look like or what may trigger that. So still working through some of those things for the public health emergency. And as that gets extended and how vaccine is implemented and distributed, and when individuals are vaccinated, as we see cases start to decrease, those likely, from my opinion, would be maybe some triggers to help start defining what the end of an incident period, what the date of the end of an incident period may be.
Okay, and I guess similarly, there are some questions about what the time frame for winding down the program will be. So once the incident period is defined, have you given thought to how you would be able to give providers and their clients time to prepare for the winding down of the program when it's going to happen?
Exactly. That's a great question. Something we actually just discussed last week, almost verbatim. So yes, when incident period ends and you hear a date come out of whenever that is in the future, we are going to work with our FEMA regions and states and tribes and territorial partners. That it doesn't mean that we'll work with them to have a period to ensure that sheltering, non-congregate sheltering, is closed or shut down in a timely manner. So if there's one date that's put out as an end of incident period, we'll work with everyone to make sure that there's some kind of period of maybe potentially 30 days or something past that to help work with locals to shut down efficient non-congregate sheltering.
Okay, good. Yeah, that'll be very important. I'm glad I'm not surprised, but glad you're all thinking about that already. I would think at least 30 days would be the time really needed for administrators to be able to plan. Also, what, if anything, do eligible states, cities, nonprofits who are currently doing this work, what do they need to do to gain approval? Do they need to do anything, or is this just automatic now? They can intend to continue operating these programs and know that FEMA will reimburse them?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's for across the nation. There's different ways that states are implementing the policy. So I would think that I would say that the keeping in touch with your local county emergency management agency or even state emergency management agency would be the best way forward to make sure that you have the right information to continue or in non-congregate sheltering in your area.
Okay. And so one of the other things that's been a restriction or a challenge for some communities doing this work is that it seems there's been different interpretation by regional administrators for the eligible population for non-congregate shelter. So some regional administrators have had very narrow interpretation for people who are COVID positive, COVID exposed, medically at risk, and others have had a broader interpretation for anybody who is experiencing homelessness and living in congregate shelter or encampments. So does this policy apply to the broader set of eligible people experiencing homelessness?
To the extent possible, with all of our COVID-19 policies and how we've transformed a lot of our policies from our natural disaster work to global pandemic work this year, we tie as much of it as possible to CDC and public health officials' guidance. So when we're looking at updating our policies and ensuring that they're meeting the needs, we really look towards what are in public health officials' guidance and what's in some of those public health official orders to help make sure that we're implementing the policies is allowing folks to implement, regions to implement it as they need to within their regions.
Okay, so I appreciate this all. I appreciate your time. We will, I think we will have some follow-up questions and would love to stay in touch with you, Dave and Hildy, on this. And would just urge and encourage you to put as much of this in writing as you can as quickly as possible. And we'd love to get that from you and share it out with our full network. Because again, a lot of people are very pleased with this change, have a lot of questions about what it means now, and are eager to continue keeping people who are experiencing homelessness safe during the pandemic, which I know is your intention as well. So the sooner you can put this in writing and share it out, the better. And we'll be happy to share it, blast it out to our full network when you have that. So thank you.
All right, thank you again for the opportunity today. It's great talking to you all, and I just want to echo our FEMA state relationship as well. And as we prioritize populations for assistance, it's the joint relationship between the two to move forward. So just trying to make sure that the needs are met in the field, and it's great to have these opportunities to hear how we can affect change with our policies moving forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dave. Thanks, Hildy. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go back. I'm going to go back to the previous topic of the COVID relief package. We have hundreds and hundreds of questions, and I'm sorry that I won't be able to get to them all today, but I will say that some of them, I'm not going to get to them because I don't have the answers, and we're working on getting the answers. And any chance we are able to take the questions that you're asking and answer it in writing through fact sheets or FAQs, we will. So expect a lot more information from us and updated information when we have it. But there were a few questions about the deadlines and what applied to what. And I think Alayna and others have been answering those in the chat box, but I did just want to clarify one that I saw, because I refer to, and I think maybe in the fact sheet we refer to, no, it's actually just me. The fact sheet says it correctly. So the extension of the coronavirus relief fund applies to spending the full coronavirus relief fund, not only the funds that are being utilized or were allocated for rental assistance. I focused on that piece because, of course, that's what we're tracking, and that's where we know there's difficulty with spending some of that money. But the extension is for the full coronavirus relief funds, and the extension goes from, it was previously had to be spent for expenses incurred by December 30th, 2020, so next week or soon after. That's now extended to December 31st, 2021. So it's a full year extension for spending that money. There's a question back to the eviction moratorium. So one, explaining why Congress extended it only to the end of January. I think I covered some of this. You know, the eviction moratorium, the federal eviction moratorium, has been controversial with landlords and apartment associations, and they have been suing in state, local, and federal court to overturn that eviction moratorium. Groups like the National Apartment Association, the National Association of Home Builders are plaintiffs on the federal lawsuits to overturn the CDC eviction moratorium. And some of these same associations had their membership calling and emailing and urging members of Congress to oppose any extension of any eviction moratorium. So there was a lot of reluctance from some key Republicans to include an extension of the moratorium. I will say, though, in that bipartisan group that came up with their package initially, you know, Senator Susan Collins and Senator Rob Portman were the two Republicans who were the lead on negotiating the housing provisions of the bipartisan bill. And ultimately they did make sure, along with the really strong advocacy from Senator Mark Warner and Joe Manchin, to have it be included in that package. There were then further battles to keep it in. The thinking, on the one hand, to have it be through January 31st, what some Republicans have said, like Senator Mark Grecco from Idaho, he has said that he believes an eviction moratorium is not necessary because there's substantial emergency rental assistance provided. To which we said, one, it's not enough rental assistance. This is enough to pay a quarter of the back rent that some estimate is going to be owed by January. So it's not enough. And even if the bill were enacted today, it can't possibly it's literally impossible to get to the renters who need it in time to prevent their eviction on January 1st. So they felt ultimately okay with extending it through the 31st on the belief that rental assistance can get to renters in time. Again, we certainly don't believe that it still can get there in time, and it's not going to be enough, so it has to be extended beyond then. But having it go through, just another benefit of having it go through January 31st is that gets us past the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden, and we are urging him to, on his first day in office, issue a new executive order for a new, strengthened, and enforced and extended eviction moratorium. And we can share with you all the transition memo that we have, where we have that extended eviction moratorium request in it. We also work together with the National Housing Law Project and Eviction Lab, and have a one-pager that we have sent to Joe Biden's team on the need to improve and extend an eviction moratorium. You all signed on to a letter. We have 2 letters at the moment, and we have over 1,500 organizations signed on to each. One is to the CDC, urging them to extend and improve and enforce its eviction moratorium. The other is to Congress. In January, we'll be reaching out to have a similar letter to President-elect Biden and Vice President Harris, urging the same. So as I said earlier, this is it's urgently needed now, and then we'll have a lot more work to do in January to make sure people continue to be protected and are not evicted. Okay, let me see what other questions I can answer here. Well, relatedly, I think I talked about this earlier, but another question here is, does the extended eviction moratorium fix any of the flaws or the gaps in the initial CDC order, specifically the issues with the FAQ document, it does not. It simply extends the existing moratorium through the end of January. Let's see. Okay. How will this program work? Oh, Alayna, I think this is going to be a question for you. So maybe you can unmute yourself and answer the question about how this program works with duplication of benefits related to funding already received through the CARES Act. Alayna, do you want to unmute yourself? And
Hi, Diane. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, the rental assistance provided through the Coronavirus Relief Fund would not be regarded as income. It wouldn't be considered when determining eligibility for federal benefits. However, the household receiving other forms of federal housing assistance is not eligible to receive emergency rental assistance. So I don't really have too much more on that, but that is what the bill text says. And I can look more into that and provide like a more in-depth answer, but that's what we know right now.
Great. Thanks, Alayna.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and speaking of which, I want to let everybody know that, of course, we'll continue having these weekly national calls, and starting on our next one, we'll go back mostly to the previous format. We'll have multiple federal, state, and local speakers to talk about what's happening in their communities. We also, I want to remind everybody that we have a number of working groups, as we call them, so smaller calls that everybody is invited to participate in. And one of the ones that we had early on that were weekly, and then we turned it into every 2 weeks, but we're going to go back to weekly in January, which is the state and local implementation working group. So that's one where we're going to be hearing from each other and troubleshooting and information sharing with each other about how these funds are getting out into local communities. What are some of the challenges? What do we need to be thinking about to overcome some of those challenges? Those calls were really helpful, I think, for everybody who participated early after the CARES Act was enacted, to think through the same kind of challenges with some of the CARES Act funds. I think it's going to be even more so with this big pot of $25 billion for emergency rental assistance. So you should look out in January for information about those state and local implementation calls, and please, everybody's welcome, so please plan to join them. We also have had every 2 weeks, but again, might go back to weekly for a period of time because of this policy change, calls on working with FEMA. Same idea for communities who are getting reimbursed through FEMA to move people experiencing homelessness to safety, to non-congregate shelters. It's a place for us to talk with each other, hear about what's happening, what's working, what's not, figure out solutions together. We also have our weekly legislative working group. That one we might put a pause on for a little bit of time, but not too long, because we need to immediately be thinking together as a community about what are the next set of immediate and long-term solutions that we are going to be pushing Congress to enact. Both Joe Biden and the leadership in the House and the Senate have indicated they intend maybe to do another COVID relief package next year. So we need to set our priorities for that, and certainly our longer term priorities as well. And we also have our, at this point, it's monthly Tenant Talk Live calls. Those are on Monday evenings. The next one in January will be on the 4th. And those are primarily for renters to, whether you're in subsidized housing or not in need of subsidized housing, to join a call with some NLIHC staff and external partners to talk about issues that are most impacting your lives, whether related to COVID or not. So those calls we may also have more frequently now that there's going to be emergency rental assistance dollars flowing. So look out for more information on that. Look out for more information from us on the details of these programs. There's literally about 300 questions that you all are asking, and we're gonna pull them together and share back out with you answers to these questions. I think some of them are already answered in the fact sheet. We're going to expand on that fact sheet as we're able to learn more. And if there are other questions that you have asked that we can answer, we'll put together an FAQ and we'll send it back out to you all as soon as we can. And then the last question that several of you have asked that I just want to be very clear on is that no, this bill has not been enacted yet. So the next step is that just about an hour ago, the language for the whole COVID relief package was filed. And I should say too, just to pause there for a second, is that the COVID relief package is much bigger than housing. So there is funding for extended unemployment insurance. There are some stimulus checks. There are funds for food assistance. There's some funding for small business owners. That it's a much bigger package beyond housing. But that bill was filed. So was a massive omnibus spending bill, which is a $1.4 trillion bill to continue funding the entire federal government, including HUD and Treasury and its housing and community development programs. And there are a few other bills that are being attached to that as well. So the NLIHC policy team, whoever's not on this call now, they are all hard at work right now, reading through the bill language, pulling out all the relevant information. And you can expect from us within a few hours, we'll be sending out an e-blast to our entire network with all the details we have about what's in the THUD budget, what's in the COVID relief package related to housing and homelessness, and to urge everybody to call your member of Congress and urge that they enact this immediately. There might be a vote in the House late tonight. It's possible it could even go into the very early hours of tomorrow in the Senate, or a vote in the Senate tomorrow, and then it goes to the president for his signature. And again, we will be keeping you posted with e-blasts and alerts to this network and to our full network. So thank you all very much for joining the call. Again, thank you for your tremendous work and advocacy that got us to this place. We have so much work to do ahead to get to full comprehensive solutions and to make sure that this money gets to the people who need it the most. And I am really heartened by the fact that it will be this network, this group of people that will be working together on all of it, because we are effective when we fight together. So thank you all very much. Take care and happy holidays.